Tonight, and we are seeing new images of the destruction left behind by that 7.1 magnitude earthquake in Mexico this week. This drone video shows the damage at a church. This is right near the epicenter and some 70 miles south of Mexico City. Tonight, the number of deaths almost 300, but days after the ground shook, rescuers still pulling people from the rubble alive. CBS 4's Manuel Bojorquez shows us one incredible rescue.
This was the moment rescuers first made contact with a woman named Paulina, her foot barely visible.
Mueve tu mano.
Move your hands, the rescuer says. Can you hear me?
Ahí estás. Okay.
There you are.
Aguántame tantito.
The woman, a human resources worker,
Okay.
was at her office when the earthquake struck Tuesday.
Ya vamos para allá, madre. Aguántanos tantito.
We'll get to you, he says. Hold on. Rodrigo Heredia Chia is one of the thousands of amateur search and rescue workers who have trained for this type of disaster. What did you hear down there?
I'm here. I'm here.
Twice they had to leave Paulina for their own safety as the rubble became unsteady, making the space even tighter. So about a foot?
Yes, something like yes, it's a foot.
They had to burrow down 2 stories and then use cables to attempt to pull her to safety. Now wearing a hard hat, and 6 hours after they first found her, Paulina was rescued. What does it represent for this country?
Hope.
Hope. A bit of good news. That all unfolded in the office building behind me. Surprisingly, Paulina was not seriously injured. She's one of about 60 people who have been pulled from the rubble alive here in Mexico City. And as hopes diminish of finding others, crews say they are not prepared to give up just yet.
So where is this storm Maria headed next? CNN meteorologist Chad Myers has the answer. What do we see?
Headed to the Turks and Caicos, I believe. Our Polo Sandoval is right there. Now, the storm is not done with the Dominican Republic. The North Shore, which we couldn't get anybody to because the storm was bearing down last night, that's where the damage is being done now. That's where the storm surge is. That's where the winds are right now, from Puerto Plata all the way down on that North Shore of Puerto Rico. We're also still seeing, or Dominican Republic, we're also still seeing rainfall into Puerto Rico proper. Can't tell you or show you the radar, because the radar is still broken. In fact, we just got a notice off of the National Weather Service chat that they may be 2 weeks before they can even get to the radar because there are so many trees down on the roadways. And obviously the radar is on as high a hill as you can get. They put it on top of a mountain, which is a good place for it until you have to go fix it. There's the storm right now, 115 miles per hour. It is a really big storm eye-wise, about 50 miles across. Think about how it was about 10 miles across when it hit Puerto Rico. That skater with her arms out or with the arms in, the arms are out right now. And it is forecast finally to turn to the right away from the U.S. We've been watching this wiggle for the past couple days. Does it wiggle too much back to the U.S.? So far, so good today. The answer is no.
Well, a terrifying situation unfolding in Puerto Rico tonight. As many as 70,000 people are being evacuated because a dam is failing. It's in the northwest part of the island, and as you can see here, there is a valley that is beyond the Oaxaca Dam. That 90-year-old dam is now failing, and there's fear that anyone left behind downstream could be killed. The situation in Puerto Rico is dire. More than 15 inches of rain falling on the mountains surrounding this dam, swelling the reservoir behind it. The Weather Service urging people to move to higher ground, calling it extremely dangerous, life-threatening. Buses are evacuating people as the water moves in. As officials are scrambling there, the rest of the island dealing with no power, no gas, widespread flooding, and a crumbling infrastructure.
What do you suggest we do?
The mayor of San Juan, Carmen Yulín Cruz, wading through the hardest hit streets of her city, literally going door to door.
This is the area called Ocean Park. It's got a little bit too much ocean right now.
All around her, water and devastation. Reservoirs for clean drinking water have been depleted, fuel very quickly running out. Already, residents are trying to cope without power. Outdated and fragile, most of Puerto Rico's power lines are above ground. No match for Maria. Some families resorted to living outside by flashlight. Ricardo Ramos runs the country's main power company. He spoke to CBS News correspondent David Begnaud.
Well, what are we talking? Weeks without power or months?
I think we're going to be talking about months.
Meantime, at the San Juan Orphanage for Girls, food and water both running out. The sister in charge says she wants to give the kids in her care everything they need, but that without food and water, it's impossible.
We've had a particularly bad hurricane season this year. To be fair, it only takes one severe hurricane in order for it to be remembered as a particularly bad one. But this year, we've already had 2 Category 5s, and the season doesn't finish until the end of November. Now, part of the reason why we've had such destructive storms has to be man. There's not really any way round it at this point. Because the world is warming, it means the seas are warming. This means 2 things, really. Firstly, the seas are expanding, and that means if you get a storm surge, the base level for the sea is already higher than it should be, so that storm surge will be that little bit higher. And also, the seas are warmer, which means there's more energy for these storms. These hurricanes feed off the very warm waters of the sea, so the warmer that the ocean is, the more energy these storms have. So we're not expecting there to be more storms necessarily, but the storms we see are becoming increasingly powerful. The other thing that, of course, that has to be addressed is what we're doing to the earth, not just making it warmer, but really changing the landscape. Before, perhaps when there was soil and mud, it would have been easier for water to be absorbed. But if you tarmac a large area, there's nowhere for that water to go. Houston is one of the fastest growing cities in the US. Now, they had a phenomenal amount of rain from our Storm Harvey, and it would have flooded no matter what. But we have tarmacked large areas, and if you change a region that much, that has to have made matters worse. Also, we're building in more precarious areas as well. When we had flooding in the UK, there we were building on floodplains. In Houston, people were said to be building inside the dam regions. We've also got to look at deforestation, because the trees are really there to protect us in a way. If you take away all the trees, then you're suddenly more vulnerable to flash flooding and to landslides as well. Obviously, it's the poorer countries where we're seeing the deforestation at its worst extent, and that's where there's the greatest problem, because you've also got very vulnerable houses. At the moment then, there's nothing really changing. We're building like we've never built before, and the world is still warming at a very fast rate. The earth is still heating, there's more energy for these storms. We're also changing the landscape. Things will continue to get worse.
Best path to a more peaceful world. Independent and sovereign nations that serve and respect their own people. When you look at what's going on in the world, you have so many where they don't respect their people. But we want nations that cooperate together to create better for all people. That's what we're all about, all people. And we can't have madmen out there shooting rockets all over the place. And by the way, Rocket Man should have been handled a long time ago. Little Rocket Man. We're going to do it because we really have no choice. We really have no choice. Now he's talking about a massive weapon exploding over the ocean, Pacific Ocean, which causes tremendous calamity. Where that plume goes, so goes cancer, so goes tremendous problems. We're dealing with somebody that we'll figure out. He may be smart, he may be strategic, and he may be totally crazy. But you know what? No matter what he is, we're going to handle it, folks. Believe me, we're going to handle it.
All right, this guy could cause a problem. We're now getting word that Kim Jong-un, despite the fact that we are closing the circles and the Chinese are closing all financial lending to him, well, he fires back with a promise to test a hydrogen bomb over the Pacific Ocean.
North Korean Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho basically delivered the warning while here in New York that Kim Jong-un would have the final say on whether to detonate that hydrogen bomb over the Pacific. He calls it the highest level of hardline countermeasure in history. Now, let's talk history here in North Korea. So far, they have conducted 6 nuclear tests. All of them have been underground, never beyond its own borders. First of all, can they pull this off?
Julie, I think they can pull it off. The question is, what happens if they do? Because keep in mind, if you're talking about launching an ICBM, putting a hydrogen bomb on it, and then lobbing it into the South Pacific, that's a huge geographic area. But we have to presume, if you just pull a map out, that missile would have to probably go over Japan. It could potentially even go over Guam. It would go over a lot of space. The danger of something going wrong is immense. Keep in mind, the North Koreans have not perfected this technology yet. There's a high probability that there could be an error, a tracking error. There's so many different problems that can happen. And then imagine if that missile went down over South Korea or Japan armed with a hydrogen bomb. That is the most dangerous and escalatory thing the North Koreans can do.
Yeah, and just to put in perspective what a hydrogen bomb is, there's the atomic bomb, which is the bomb that we the U.S. dropped over Hiroshima. The hydrogen bomb, basically, you're looking at 10 tons versus 10,000 kilotons. The magnitude effect of this would be devastating for our environment if it were to actually fall into the Pacific. But instead of letting his foreign minister do the crazy talk for him, Kim actually came out, had his own direct words for President Trump, which actually led all of us to Webster Dictionary, because he called Trump a mentally deranged dotard who is unfit to hold the prerogative of supreme command of a country. Now, it's interesting because shortly after Kim's statement, Twitter tossed the question to Merriam-Webster asking for dotard's definition. And then Webster tweeted, Kim Jong-un calls Trump a mentally deranged U.S. dotard. Searches for dotard are high as a kite. Okay, so if you haven't looked it up, I have for you. And here's the definition of a dotard. It's a person in his or her dotage. What the heck is dotage? So then I looked that up, and that means a state or period of senile decay marked by decline of mental poise and alertness. I don't even have words. Should we be worried?
I think we have to. I mean, what I'm really nervous about here, Julie, is we're descending into really uncharted waters with North Korea. We have been through many different crises with North Korea. If you go back to 2012, 2013, if you go back to the 1990s, you go back to the Cold War, the actual threat of the North Koreans to do an atmospheric test of a hydrogen bomb is unprecedented. Nobody does atmospheric tests of nuclear weapons anymore for a very simple reason. You're spreading radioactive fallout potentially all over the planet. You're going to have lots of people who are going to end up getting cancer, having all sorts of thyroid problems, because radioactivity spreads globally through the oceans, through the winds. It's terrible.
It's no shocker North Korea is responding this way. We could have all predicted this one, considering President Trump this week threatened to destroy North Korea if provoked. But to that, Kim responded to Trump's remarks saying this, that Trump convinced me rather than frightening or stopping me that the path I chose is correct and that it is the one I have to follow to the last. He also described the president as a rogue and a gangster fond of playing with fire. How would Pyongyang conduct a nuclear test over the Pacific? And then ultimately, what impact would it have specifically for those people living on the West Coast who are watching this back and forth rhetoric and are thinking and praying that this doesn't actually happen and scared?
Well, what they could do is, I mean, it's a question of do they have the range and do they have the guidance systems to go that far? Because obviously the South Pacific is a huge geographic area. So they would have to pick a place on the map essentially that's depopulated, that there's no islands, that there's no native populations there. But the challenge with all of this is, as we know, radioactivity spreads all over the planet. And this is why nobody does these type of tests anymore. So we have to be concerned. The other thing we have to keep in mind is Kim might be bluffing. Remember, he didn't attack Guam or fire missiles near Guam, and he said he would. What he could do in this scenario is fire an ICBM, not nuclear armed, but literally drop its payload, 200-300 miles off the coast of the West Coast to prove that he has the range to hit the United States. I think that's a real possibility.
Here's something you may not be aware of. The world is running out of antibiotics. That is according to a new World Health Organization report.
The WHO report says there aren't enough new drugs being developed, especially for serious and drug-resistant infections like tuberculosis. Researchers warn that most of the antibiotics that are preparing to go to market are really just modifications of existing antibiotics. So Dr. Sarah Pauline is a microbiologist. She's with the WHO, and she contributed to that report. She joins us now from Geneva. So help us understand, doctor, there are not enough new drugs coming to market that can combat these new diseases that are popping up. That's what it is?
Yes, exactly. That's correct. What we found, of course, because resistance has been emerging and really spreading tremendously quickly, it is a natural phenomenon that bacteria do develop resistance. But our pipeline, unfortunately, is not able to keep up with the development of resistance, and partly it's also due to market failure. There's less incentives to develop new antibiotics. Scientifically, it's very challenging, and if you just look at a new, for example, tuberculosis treatment, we've only really had 2 new antibiotics come to market in the last 70 years. So it shows you what the situation is, and we are already starting to face really multi-drug resistant and ultimately untreatable infections such as gonorrhea.
Eyes focused on the showdown with North Korea. The North Koreans speaking at the UN today. Iran also defying the world with another missile launch. State TV airing video of what it claims is the first successful test of a new type of medium-range ballistic missile. It can reportedly reach targets throughout the Middle East, including Israel, and carry multiple warheads.
There is suspicion that North Korea may have conducted a new nuclear test. Seismic monitors detected a magnitude 3.4 earthquake in the north this morning. According to a nuclear watchdog group, the seismic activity took place about 30 miles from where previous nuclear tests have been carried out. That's a far weaker quake than previous nuclear tests have caused. But China's earthquake center says it was caused by a suspected explosion, while South Korea calls the tremor a natural event.
And we do have breaking news right now coming from Mexico, where there's been yet another earthquake. And we do have live pictures, I believe, of what's going on there in Mexico right now. This latest one clocked at a 6.2. It's centered in the southern state. Now this, of course, just days after that deadly earthquake that's killed 300 people so far. Of course, we'll continue to follow the developments in this story and bring you the very latest developments. And of course, you can always stay up to date online at abcactionnews.com.
Well, hundreds of small tremors have rattled the mountain this week, and Indonesian authorities have issued their highest level of alert. People are recommended to stay at least 9 kilometers from the crater. More than 1,000 people died when Mount Agung last erupted in 1963.